Good afternoon and welcome to the South Wedge Mission. My name is Matthew. I'm the priest here, and I'm really grateful for you to be with us this day as the body of Christ, not just in this space, but in this place we call Earth, in this world. The body of Christ at 3:45-ish on Sunday, when I'm recording this, or whenever you're watching this, would not be complete without the gifts and the presence that you bring to it. So thank you in advance. Today is the third Sunday in the season of Lent, and today we're going to focus on a really famous story of Jesus clearing out the money changers from the temple. And as we get into that, we're going to explore an intersection of two kind of difficult but important topics. One of them is the topic of anger and how we turn rage into outrage. Anger lives in our body. It can be a very powerful emotion. And so as we meditate on that, just wanted to give you a heads up so you could start to hold that question. What makes you angry? Where does that anger come from? And what might it be to transfigure that rage into outrage? How does it become action that is transformative? The other thing that this text brings up is the question of anti-Semitism in Christian tradition. And it's a reality, it's a horror, it is an aberration, and it's something we must roundly condemn. Often our texts will mention things, especially in the Gospel of John, where our text comes from today. It names the Jews as kind of Jesus's interlocutors. And it's important for us to remember, and we'll reiterate this again later, that Jesus, even the early Christians were also Jews. And there was a conversation going on within Judaism about Jesus and the future of the tradition. And so this is not something that we should ever allow ourselves to map onto Jewish folks or to see it as a reason to be anti-Jewish in any way. And we have to continue to work on that. But just wanted to hold that up, and we'll get into it later. But it always needs to be said, and it cannot be said enough. Anti-Semitism is evil. With that, let us center our hearts and minds for worship. You can find a copy of the bulletin in the description of this on Facebook. And again, let us settle in, even as we head towards transfiguring anger. We start with the pause and the silence out of which our voices are born. With a simple chant, be still and know that I am God. Deep breaths down into your heart, into your core, into your body. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. We're beginning today's story with the gospel reading from the Gospel of John. Just as the story comes at the beginning of John's gospel and not at the end as in the others, so the gospel will come first today. The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle, and also poured out the coins from the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." His disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Then they said to him, "What sign can you show us for doing this?" And Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" but he was speaking of the temple of his body. And a blessing from Jan Richardson. Anger is a woman who has learned the pleasantness is not the way to peacefulness, that silence is not the way to strength. Anger is a woman who has learned to breathe from her belly, who waits at your door bringing you offerings, who knows your true name and gives it back to you. She has lived on the streets. She knows prisons and alleys and mud. She has seen hungry children and broken women and desperate men and spoken to them in their own tongues. They gave her a song, and she sings it to you. Welcome to Liturgy. And the peace, a blessing from Jan Richardson. Blessed are you who journey with a time with anger, for you will know the resurrection that lies beyond. For as hymn writer William Alexander Percy invites us to remember, the peace of God, it is no peace, but strife closed in the sod. Yet, beloved, pray for but one thing, the marvelous peace of God. And may the peace of Christ be with you always, and also with you. Let us share signs of peace, whether you use the comments or your device, or you can turn to someone and say it, or you just send them prayers and your thoughts. Let us share signs of peace. And peace be with you this day. Got a chant here. I don't remember where I learned it. I learned it by ear. But this is one I want us to just, again, continue our meditation as it goes deeper into our bodies. The body that Jesus promised to resurrect in a new way. Deep down inside of me, I got a fire going on. Part of me wants to sing about the light. Part of me wants to cry, cry, cry. Chant that with me. Deep down inside of me, I got a fire going on. Part of me wants to sing about the light. Part of me wants to cry, cry, cry. Deep down inside of me, I got a fire going on. Part of me wants to sing about the light. Part of me wants to cry, cry, cry. Deep down inside of me, I got a fire going on. Part of me wants to sing about the light. Part of me wants to cry, cry, cry. Deep down inside of me, I got a fire going on. Part of me wants to sing about the light. Part of me wants to cry, cry, cry. Let us pray. Lord of the overturning, your passion sweeps away the calculating religion, the pious profiteering which keeps us safely outside the holy places. May we find our way through the debris of all that protected us to find your dangerous heart and our world upside down. Through Jesus Christ, our exiled Lord. Amen. And a brief reading from Dance of the Dissident Daughter by Sue Monk Kidd. The transfiguration of anger is a movement from rage to outrage. Rage implies an internalized emotion, a tempest within. Rage, or what might be called untransfigured anger, can become a calcified bitterness. What rage wants and needs is to move outwards towards positive social purpose, to become a creative force or energy that changes the conditions that created it. It needs to become outrage. Outrage is love's wild and unacknowledged sister. She is the one who recognizes feminine injury, stands on the roof and announces it as if she has to, then jumps into the fray to change it. She is the one grappling with her life, reconfiguring it, struggling to find liberating ways of relating. Outrage is the one who never bores God or goddess. Grace, mercy, and peace are yours from the triune God. Amen. Today's text about Jesus overturning the tables of the money changers in the temple is a real favorite, especially among kind of the activists and social radicals that many of us aspire to be or maybe admire. I've often seen this, right, depicted of Jesus knocking over the tables, and they've got names of like big banks on them or of systemic injustices. And it's even used in some circles as a reason to get physically involved, maybe even to do property destruction in the process of protesting. I'm not advocating for that per se today, but wanting to acknowledge that for a swath of the population, this is an extremely exciting text because it shows Jesus outraged enough about injustice to take action. And we're going to get there. It's really important that, yes, as Sumunk Kid reminds us, the best thing we can do with the rage that simmers within us about injustices in the church, in the world, in our city, in our community, or within ourselves is not merely to let them stew into a conflagration which consumes and destroys, but to find ways to transfigure that anger into what Sumont Kids calls a cooking fire. Something that doesn't consume and burn up, but which makes things that can feed you and can feed a whole lot of other people, as she puts it. But I think in order to understand how to perform this alchemy of transformation, we need to kind of look at another way that this text is misread or maybe misunderstood, because I think the two are interrelated. So as I'm saying this, maybe also hold what gives you rage or anger within, and start to just hold it without judgment or concern, and just be honest with yourself. I'm angry about, I have rage at. Before you try to transfigure it, just hold it and be aware of it, because it's okay. It's part of who you are. It's part of your body. It's a part of the presence that you have now. And in the world we live in, how could we not be angry? But the reason that this anger and this rage is worth transfiguring is because it is part of the image of God living in us. Too often, rage and anger are seen as these negative qualities, right? Especially in not white straight men, right? It's okay for white men to get angry. We usually get a free pass in the unjust way things that they are. But when women or people of color or people who are oppressed and marginalized by those who are unafraid to let their anger turn into violence, they're often told, right? Don't be angry. Don't come off as such an angry woman or such an angry black person. And this is an injustice, because it is not the indignation of privileged white men which reflects the image of God. But it is the cry for justice, the desire to destroy that which takes away life, the desire to see all of God's children living in abundance, which not only flows from part of our truest self, but is a reflection of the image of the God who saw people in slavery in Egypt, said, "Let my people go," and then acted on their behalf to liberate them from death and lead them into life. The God who sends prophets to call out those who profiteer off of others in order to liberate those who are suffering under the yoke of economic, social, and religious oppression. It's an image of the God who is jealous for us, loves us so much with a burning passion that when God sees us doing things that are unfaithful to the image of God in us, unfaithful to one another, unfaithful to God, God gets angry. God intervenes. God will fight for us. Not fight at us, not try to destroy us, but will fight for us, even speaking uncomfortable truths into our midst. And the thing is, this isn't something Christians discovered. This is something that the Jewish people in particular emphasized and preached and proclaimed, and it lived in their experience, which is why understanding the ways that anti-Semitism also keeps us from seeing the truth of this text are vital to understanding what it means to transfiguring rage into outrage. Ironically, the Christian church has been persecuting and murdering and destroying Jewish people since it's been around, and yet they're the ones who teach us what true outrage should really look at like. A mentor of mine once said that the thing that makes us most outraged at someone else, right, that raises resentment and anger when we see it in other people, is often a reflection of something that we're angry about in ourselves or that we're hiding from ourselves, right? How ironic that the main reading of this text you've probably heard, right, a million times, even in a progressive church, is look at those people who are so in love with their temple and their rules and their religious rites and their money. Look how they're the bad people. And Jesus comes in to cast out their greedy, money-grabbing, law-abiding, institution-loving, building-hugging ways and show them the true hippie religion of the God of love who just cares about people. We've all heard that, right? Old Testament God, not good. New Testament God, love and kisses, right? And we fail to acknowledge that this characterization of Jews is not actually what the Bible is teaching us in any of these passages. It's what, and if anything, the Protestant Reformation has taught us because of the polemic against Catholics trying to make them out to be rule-following, rote religion, worshiping buildings and money, and look at us Protestant reformers who are all about grace and love and goodness, right? That's a reading we're projecting back into the text. And even in this, in the same way, in the scene about Jesus clearing out the temple, the money changers, they weren't doing anything out of the ordinary. If anything, they were helping to provide access to people who were not from Jerusalem so that they could use their own currency as a way to participate in the temple. The people with the animals in the same way were enabling access and worship. Not because you needed to have a sacrifice or God hated you, but because it was a way people sought to practice their devotion in the same way that you might be watching this video now. The people in the text would not have been offended by the presence of money changers in the temple. Which isn't to say we shouldn't question unjust financial practices. We absolutely should. And this text might lead us to do so. But this text is not singling out Jewish people or temple worship as the source of problems. People can use buildings and money in ways that are life-giving. Jesus is only doing what God has done since the very beginning. When God is angry about something, especially when God's children are treating other of God's children inhumanely and unjustly, God gets involved. God gets angry. God is willing to argue with us. God is willing even to do some drastic things to get our attention. And again, as we Christians, we don't tolerate a lot of difference. We're either right or wrong, Protestant or Catholic, Republican or Democrat, progressive or conservative, or maybe liberal somewhere in the middle. And if you're wrong, I'll argue to the death. You're wrong, I'm right. That's how Christianity has always been. But it's not how Judaism has always been. Judaism embraces these kinds of encounters. It embraces having a God who gets angry back and you can argue with, and a God that we don't get to control every dimension of in order to protect us from having to face our own truths. All of my Jewish friends love arguing. They get mad when I don't argue with them or when I can't have a constructive argument or I take things personally because they're saying, I'm just being friends with you. We argue and then we have fun afterwards, right? We argue and we get along because argument is part of what keeps God alive and keeps study alive and keeps a freshness to the text. Jesus appearing in the temple saying, I'm not a fan of how things are going, is not Christians telling Jews we're better than you. It's not. The Old Testament God is not some evil being and the New Testament God is not some perfectly pure God of grace. It's all one and the same. The God who is grace and creator and glory and coming into the world to liberate is also the God who gets righteously angry about the way that God's children treat one another unjustly. And is willing to come into the midst and say, not get your money changers out of here, but what are you doing in general? This is one Jew telling other Jews, critiquing the tradition in the tradition of the prophets. What are we doing to make this whole thing, our lives, our practice of God, something that is either completely accessible to others and is proclaiming good news and is liberating the oppressed? Are we really practicing our spirituality from our heart, from a place that is inclusive and integrational? Or are we seeking to have power and control? Again, it's not to say that there weren't people doing that in Jesus' time. It's just to acknowledge it's not tied to their Jewishness. It's a Jew challenging his own tradition, as many Jews before him had done, and many have done afterwards, as many Christians should do within our tradition. So let's not pin it on the Jews. Instead, let's remember that this argument is welcome, that it is a tradition in Judaism of God's anger flaring up at injustice and God getting involved, not to destroy us or send us to hell, but to set us back on the right path. And that's where our righteous anger comes in. Because if we can remember that our righteous anger is not there to destroy, but to rebuild the household of God, to resurrect something that has been destroyed, not tied to just a building, right? But tied to the whole household of God, the people of God, Jews and Christians and others who are of goodwill and who are seeking to transform the world. So when God gets angry, it is for the sake of transfiguration. It is for the sake of feeding others, for making new, for entering into dialogue and conversation, while also putting a hard stop on practices that bring death, destruction, and dehumanization. That's what it means to have righteous anger in the image of God. And you should be angry about the things we see in the world this week. A 3-year-old was in her mother's arms as her mother was tear gassed by the same police officers who were present at the last tear gassing of a minor. And the PAB that I'm a part of stood up. We said, we're no longer just going to talk about this. We're going to do something about it. And we were outraged enough to do a press conference. It's not to say, look at us, we're so great. But it is to say, rage only gets us so far. Outrage leads us into action. If you love nature and creation, you see the ways we treat the world, and we merely just kind of wag our fingers and post things on Facebook, but we don't transfigure that into outrage and get involved in protecting our environment, then we don't have anger in the image of God. Anger in the image of God says, yes, this is wrong. Yes, it makes my blood boil. Yes, I want to just consume the world in slander and trolling and hatred and comments and spinning my wheels, but God's anger turns into outrage. It forges the image of God in us into a whip of cords, not to wield against human beings, but to liberate us, ourselves, and others from the anger and the resentments and the injustices that we're participating in, that others are participating in, for the sake of the liberation of God's people, for the sake of bringing back together, not to drive apart, the family of God. Zeal for my house shall consume me. The disciples remember about Jesus as he clears out the temple. Zeal is another word for jealousy. God is jealous. God does not want anything less than the fully aliveness of each of God's children, each of God's creations. God does not want to give us over to a different God which will only give us half life, or will exploit us, or which will destroy us, or which will tear us apart. God is jealous enough to say, I will fight for you because I love you and I want you as part of my family. I want everyone as part of my family. And God will intervene. And for those of us who want a vending machine God who just kind of spun up the universe and then disappeared so that we can kind of define God any way we want, this is one of those texts which really throws gears in kind of that self-generated machine. Because the God of Israel is not a God who says, I'll lay back and do nothing. The God of Israel, of whom we believe Jesus is the incarnation, gets involved. Transfigures rage into outrage, says, this body I will raise up. This household is not necessarily a building. It's not a building, it is people. We will resurrect the image of God in each person. We will dwell in a world in which there is enough for all. And we are angry enough to change things when it is not that way. I think it's not ironic that as we've been exploring the past few weeks, it's important to look at the context of these texts, right? Because often there's like what we call the Markan sandwich, or these little paradoxes. And I don't think it's a mistake that in John's gospel, this happens at the beginning of the gospel to kind of set the agenda for why Jesus is here. It's not to hate on Jewish people. It's not to be right. It's to restore the fully aliveness of every one of God's children in an active, outrageous way. But it comes after another story. Because before we see God's anger, we see God's delight at the wedding of Cana, where Jesus sees a poor couple without enough wine for their guests and turns their water into wine such that there's enough for everybody. There's an overflowing abundance of delight and joy. Jesus sees this love between human beings and says, this is so good, I want to celebrate it. I want that to overflow. I want more people to be able to enjoy this, which is why I think it's next to this story where Jesus' love turns into outrage and says, why are we not getting this? It's about the heart of the God of Israel who liberated you from slavery and loves you and didn't choose you because you're rich or powerful or anything. It's not Jesus saying Jews bad, Christians good. It's saying the God of Israel is amazing and we all need to remember that we're part of that family and there's a place for us at the table. So let's all come together and resurrect this household and live for the transformation and the restoration of the world. That's what this text is about. It forces us to take action and not just to complain. It invites us not to hate on ourselves when we feel angry, but instead to say that anger is righteous and good, and how can I transfigure it into outrage in order to reform, transform, and liberate the people of the world? That's what it means when we say that zeal for our house consumes me. When it says that we will fight, we will get involved, just as God gets involved with our lives. In whatever way we can, wherever we can start, whatever we can continue, wherever we can bring an ending to something that oppresses. When we do so, we are not only kicking over tables, we're living the image of God within us, and we are proclaiming the good news that there truly is enough for all, and that this household is a place where others can access that abundance, the abundance that Jesus came to proclaim, the abundance of the God of Israel who created all things, called them good, and said, let there be light, let there be more. It's in the name of this God that I offer this message. For our spiritual communion portion tonight, we're going to sanctify some of that anger and outrage. Hopefully you held some of that as we were sharing and talking. I know it's a lot of stuff and it's a complex topic, but in some ways digging into the complexities of a seemingly simple story like this can yield a challenge that also is more life-giving than just seeing a reflection of ourselves. So I invite you to hold that which makes you outraged, that which gives you anger, that which you long to see transfigured into some sort of transformative good, and bring it as your offering in this time. And hold it in your hand. Maybe it's a clenched fist that you need to hold this way that we can open as we go along. I'm going to do a clenched fist just because it helps me to embody that anger is in my body. I'm thinking of an injustice or something that makes me angry. Often there's a lot of things about myself that I have to hold in here and that I'm outraged by. Just hold it for a moment as we try to be with it, not to judge it or to cast it out, but to allow it to be a fire. For the Christ lives in you and also lives in you. The Spirit in my heart greets the Spirit in your heart. So let us give thanks for the gifts of love. For we delight to give thanks for the gifts of love. We remember Jan Richardson's blessing that blessed are you who journey for a time with anger, for you will know the resurrection that lies beyond. Knowing that righteous anger transfigured into outrage is a part of the image of God in each of us, we hold space for that which enrages us and seek the Spirit's healing that will enable this transformation to take place. This time you may name that outrage. Hold it out loud or in the comments section. Maybe it's an action you long to see taken. I know for me it involves police and justice and wanting to get involved in transformative ways. I also get upset with the ways that I could not waste so much time in my life. I'm going to hold both of those, the personal and the political. Get mad about how our church can be about so much about money and numbers and reports rather than the powerful transformative message of inviting more people into communion with God and one another. I hold those things and ask for the courage to transfigure them into a fire that can give life. The PAB, and my own accountability, the South Wedge Mission and other communities seeking to reform the church. We have a leash that helps to know that you are turning that into outrage. Imagine a fire on your hand. For we hold the sacredness of these inner fires, flames lit by the Spirit and breath of God, whose own outrage burns at the sight of suffering and injustice. We know, too, that God's zeal is not for any building or structure, but for the house, the family of relationships, and the bodies that hold them. And so again, from Jan Richardson, hear this blessing as an affirmation, a yes from God spoken over your outrage, that it may become a cooking fire, feeding and giving life to others. This blessing takes one look at you, and all it can say is holy. Holy hands, holy face, holy feet, holy everything in between, holy even in pain, holy even when weary, in brokenness, holy, in shame, holy still. So friend, open your eyes, your hand, holy eyes, holy fist for one moment. See what this blessing sees, this blessing that knows how you have been formed and knit together in wonder and in love. Welcome this blessing that folds its hands in prayer. When it meets you, Receive this blessing that wants to kneel in reverence before you who are temple, you who are sanctuary, you who are a home for God in this world. That anger, transfigured into outrage, is as much the love of God living in you, the image of God, as prayer, as worship, as being peaceful. I hope that we will not abandon this work. I have this song to send us with. It's a South African traditional song that Greg from church gave to me. And hope it'll be our prayer not to give up on the anger or the outrage, but to see it turned into action. We will not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We will not give up the fight that we have only started. We have only started. We have only started. What is the fight that you won't give up on? The outrage that you want to see turned into action. We will not give up this fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We will not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. What's one action, one step you can take to act on the holiness of that outrage this week, for the sake of the abundance of all God's children? We will not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We will not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started now. Hear this blessing from inflesh.com as we go forth. Beloveds, we all have unlearning to do. We have each inherited claims of wisdom that betray us. We have all lost something to lies about who we are, or what makes us valuable, or how to live a meaningful life. But we are not abandoned to these claims on us. We can shed the destructive and the deadly. We can heal and be free. God's grace has made it so. And remember again, blessed are you who journey for a time with anger, for you will know the resurrection that lies beyond. May you know that this week as you pay attention to your anger in your body, as you long to tear down structures of oppression, but also to build them up with places of love and integration and abundance. In the name of the Creator, the Sustainer, and the Redeemer. Amen. We will not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We shall not give up the fight. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We have only started. We're only getting started. Go in peace.